Claire. We're very honored to be here, actually, and so we'd like to thank the committee and Gabriel for inviting us to come up and lecture, or come down and lecture since we're in Toronto. And sorry for my voice. I have a little bit of a cold. I'd like to, I think, do a very quick, well, it's not a quick introduction, but it's a graphic introduction to our work. So instead of trying to articulate a position through, let's say, an overarching statement at the outset, we'd like to give a very quick overview of the type of work we've been involved in. Then we'll focus on a series of domestic projects, which is really the bulk of what we're showing today. They're both real and conceptual, or let's say surreal. But at the base is really a belief in architecture's capacity to generate new realities, engage us in unexpected experiences and sensations, and entice us into new activities. So the projects all have in common this preoccupation, I would say, with the subject's perceptual experience. Explicit is the physiological engagement of the body through physical, material, and informational processes. In the built houses, these effects are achieved through material and programmatic mediation, but in the more recent conceptual houses, this mediation becomes animated with responsive systems, so embedded technologies, embedded computational systems. And with this new incorporation of computational power into building matter, the ambition, let's say, towards the subject's enhancement is broadened towards issues of physical, psychological, and environmental wellness and delight. So as an intro, it's really first a rapid fire of several projects, so don't be scared, but we're just gonna...
Sign of shock and hopefully awe.
So we'll just move through very quickly for the first 5 minutes and show about 15 or 17 projects, and then focus in on 4 projects in a slower pace. So this first project, so basically positions the range and type of work we've been involved in. So, and there are a series of conceptual houses and objects. The first project is the pool house. The pool house is a house that has invaded the pool, where the bedrooms inhabit the deep end. So this is a view from the bedrooms. The gallery house is an inverted house where every activity is a window onto its own domestic activities. The mirror house is a house where the private and public programs are separated by a sheet of one-way mirror, where no space is spared from seeing itself or being seen. In this depiction, the ideal pitched roof homes of the neighbors are reflected inside the house. So the mirror house does not disturb the, let's say, the quintessential homogeneity of the suburban subdivision. The Outhouse is a proposal for the arid climate of Las Vegas, where water, as you know, is becoming increasingly a scarce commodity. The project proposes an inverted McMansion, basically the poster child of Western capitalist consumption, that in its final act of overconsumption actually ingests its own rear yard. And the ingested yard becomes a lush living filtration system, cleaning back black and gray water for reuse, so a single body of water being recycled, while offering an Edenic garden for its inhabitants. So the byproduct of this filtration is this Eden-like garden that is basically sustained by the toilet. The Mountain House is a 5-level house on a very steep slope in Whistler, BC. The client is an ex-professional snowboarder. The strategy takes its cue from the intimate engagement of a shredder following the line of a mountain. Every level creates a different relationship with the slope. The main level is a cantilevered volume, offering a necessary flat surface for outdoor living. The roof of the main level is designed to hold 15 feet of snow. The snow acts as an insulating blanket in the winter when additional insulation is required. The floor hangs from the roof by a 1-inch stainless steel, while several 1-inch stainless steel rods, in order to create the least possible visual obstruction of the exterior.
Suction cuffs is a design for restraining devices that force architectural objects into becoming accomplices in acts of human subversion. In this case, the architectural objects is the floor-to-ceiling glazing of a Las Vegas hotel room. The Studio N-1 Placebo Color Manual is an online color reference manual. Pharmaceutical companies most likely have the deepest understanding of the role that color plays in generating the placebo effect. The model gives the exact CMYK values of the top sold pharmaceutical drugs, therefore potentially unleashing the psychological effects of these colors beyond the actual pharmaceutical product. We particularly like the Phenefen 330 milligram tablet, a powerful narcotic that is on the US controlled substances list. Based on the pharmaceutical's deep reliance on color, we can only assume that the regime of pain-killing is embodied in this particular color combination. The Circa sneaker is a shoe designed for the popular skateboard shoe company Circa. Actually, the shoe was already designed, we merely had to pick the color scheme. Therefore, we consulted our own placebo color manual. When a skateboarder is hunched over in pain after one of the many wipeouts, the sight of these shoes can perhaps jumpstart the placebo-based pain relief process. The Humannequin is a design for a mannequin that adopts human traits, i.e. smell. The chair sucks the scent of a seated person, transports it through an infrastructure, and emits it through the mannequin. And here, the bubble says, "I don't know why, but I love this suit." The domestic appendix is a manual that acts as an appendix to the architectural graphic standards. The traditional architecture reference books are exhaustive in their coverage of the metrics of the body and space requirements. However, there seems to be a thorough collective agreement by the architectural discipline to ignore the spatial implications of the most common domestic behaviors. However, with a certain level of reluctance, we did feel obligated to address this data hiatus. A magnetic resonance image during intercourse in scale. The Wild Wild Urbanism book was done with students at the California College for the Arts and in collaboration with Don Schillingberg. In 2005, before California's vote on the high-speed rail, we sent every mayor in California a book that offered regional design approaches for the entire state, addressing California's challenges in the next 100 years. Adopting a high-speed rail infrastructure was the common ingredients in all the projects presented in the book.
So recently we started a lab as faculty members at the University of Toronto. This lab is called RAD. It's Responsive Architecture at Daniels. And RAD is an entity that provides resources and expertise for project-based research on the spatial ramifications of embedded technology and ubiquitous computing. So that is small microcontrollers and sensors that are becoming embedded in everyday objects. So the idea that the computer is leaving the desktop, right, and migrating into all the surfaces around us. And the idea is that projects have the potential to, perhaps digitally enhanced projects have the potential to better address persistent and emerging challenges in the areas of healthcare, building technology, and sustainability. But all the while, our interest is to place this performance in the service of pleasure and delight, I would say.
The research preoccupies itself with two interrelated questions. What if every building block gets computational power? And what if every building block gets an IP address? No, we'll do that in front of the blank. Okay. So, the digital window we see as the ground zero project for all adventures in embedded computation. It speculates on the convergence of the IP address and the window, the real and the virtual collapse. What one sees on the net is what one sees in the real. The dual state room is a systematically constructed deep infrastructure for controlling the most superficial of tectonic conditions, i.e. the wallpaper. The Erratic Chamber by Jimmy Tran is a social space in which the inhabitant changes the color of the walls with their thoughts, i.e. brainwaves. Architecture is mobilized as a mediating participant in the social interaction between people. The Fresh Air Window by Valentina Mele is a sealed glazed curtain wall unit, yet permanently supplies fresh air through the incorporation of a heat recovery ventilation hardware. The HVAC Window 3 is a curtain wall system in which the frame is a heating and cooling system that employs solid-state heat pumps in the location of the thermal break. So here I kind of have to explain a little bit more. So if you go one back, this is kind of the end of our shock and awe. So now we're going to become more informal in a way. So, so this is the sort of traditional profile of a curtain wall system. And this is this magical moment where the thermal break occurs so that cold air doesn't go, or the cold doesn't get transported towards the interior of the building. Now what we're doing is that we're replacing that magical moment where the thermal break sits, and what we put there is a Peltier device. And the Peltier device is a solid state heat pump. You put a charge on that heat pump, right, here and here, plus, minus, and what it starts to do, it simply starts to pump heat from one side of the space to the other side of the space. If you reverse the charge, it does the opposite. It starts to pump heat away from here to the outside of the space. So, and if you don't do anything, and it's very cold outside and very hot inside, this thing starts to generate energy. So now the idea is that what happens if you distribute central infrastructure in a building and distribute that over the entire skin of the building. So now you don't need ducts anymore, in which like the majority, like at least 30% of your plan and section is occupied with ducts and infrastructure. That you can sort of take out of the building. And now the skin kind of deals with all those requirements. So and these are the projects that we are now able to do within the context of the university, because we have all these other faculties to our service to collaborate with and to sort of solve complicated issues that go beyond the discipline of architecture.
I mean, this gives you a little bit of an overview of what we have done and what we are beginning to get involved in. Now we're going to focus on 4 projects, starting with this house. We recently completed this house, which we call the Genus House, a 2-phased house in Cabbagetown, Toronto. So Cabbagetown, Toronto is basically a historic preservation neighborhood where we had to maintain the formality of the streetscape, where the back, let's say, was freed of those constraints. So this is the existing situation. The client asked us to add a 3rd story as a playroom, and then and a mud room. So the problem is that we actually developed this double condition because the front of the house was in very good shape, and it was quite beautiful, but the back had already been compromised by several badly done renovations. So plus it was compromised by termites. It's a termite zone, so the entire foundation was pretty much eaten away. So we decided to make a clean cut. We have that pointer. A clean cut between the 2 volumes, and then begin again in this part of the house. So hence this double condition.
I mean, the front of the house was basically a building. It dates from like 1890, and it was a very beautiful Victorian place. That the front was completely maintained, and in the rear it was actually kind of lost all its character. So, can you still hear me when I talk this way?
Yeah.
Back there.
Yeah.
So, okay, there we go. So we start to look at the block structure of Toronto, and this is in Cabbagetown. Miraculously, we found the kind of 3 block structures that are predominantly in Toronto. The most common block structure is this. It has a kind of width enough that allows a laneway to occur in the center, So this laneway sort of addresses the kind of more informal side of the block. This laneway also maintained by all the owners of that particular block. So the city really doesn't come there. And you use the mainway, you know, most of these buildings have garages in their lanes, but this is a more affluent area, and they prefer, more families have moved into this area, so they prefer the larger garden above the garage. But the laneway basically functions as for cars to sort of be placed in their garages. Now this block is a little narrower, so the laneway is not really present there. So these two blocks have no laneways, which is, they're more or less more anomalous, but this is like a common block. Now the block in which the building is that we were designing is kind of an anomalous block in residential neighborhoods because of its width, its large width. So when we started to analyze the block, what we start to see is that with a block this wide, what starts to happen, and then I guess you can't really see it because it's fairly light, but these are all single family homes. And the property lines, they go very strangely, very odd. It creates easements, like the property line goes like this along here. And every building gets like a little property line that moves in a very odd way, so that everybody has like a little mailbox on the street. And the same, and this is all individual ownership, and this is a kind of condo development. So it sits on a single property, but they're all individual apartments in this building. So the front doors, there are front doors here, there are front doors here, here, and here. So what starts to happen is that the public space of the street, so they historically has started to enter the interior of the block. And this is the site that we were working on, and they were looking at an addition in the rear of the building. That was a kind of messy addition that we discussed before. So we kind of said like, okay, so if we're dealing with all these fronts here, there's like a kind of perfect opportunity not to consider this building having only one front, but a building with two fronts. And it's a Janus thing. Right? So we demolished the entire rear of the building, which was exactly half of the house, and we replaced that other half with a more contemporary version.
So in a sense, they had these two houses, right? The Victorian half and the contemporary house. The contemporary half would be, but as the floor plate became too large, we realized that we needed to keep that central cut as actually a void to let the light in, and also offer cross ventilation for both sides.
So we started to refer to this thing as the
Lights.
light portal. Portal in the sense that it was almost like a time machine, right? Because you have really one house, but it's actually a Victorian house and a contemporary house. So you could basically have a single house with two lifestyles, a Victorian lifestyle and a contemporary lifestyle. And then when you travel in between, you kind of travel through time, hence this portal thing. So here we split the house in half, because the only way to show it architecturally is like this. You have to cut it in half, fold it open in a kind of Rorschach-ian way. And then here we have the contemporary house. So it doesn't have any sort of compartmentalized condition. And then here is the Victorian half.
So it has four elevations, if you like, two interior ones and two exterior ones. Oh, this doesn't show at all.
So this is kind of washed out, but I'll tell you what it shows. Here it's again cut in half. On the left we have the contemporary house, which has large open spaces that sort of allow any anticipated use to occur there. Bedrooms, living spaces, play spaces. And here we have the Victorian home that is sort of deeply compartmentalized in little rooms that all have a kind of single use.
So we're taking advantage of, this is the southern side, let's say the southern exposure, and we're taking advantage of that exposure, but we have to also mitigate that exposure. So on the top level, there are three different tactics used. At the top level, the skin protrudes out and has a liner around it, sort of like a black eyeliner or the kohl of Bedouins that dampens the glare. so protects the level underneath it, but the level underneath it has a lowered lid for an increased level of privacy within that volume. And then the third volume is completely flush. The glazing is flush with the envelope, let's say, providing maximum exterior views and openings. And the exterior is curtains too, of course.
So here, side by side, you have the two faces. This is the Victorian face, hard to see, but you know, it's basically has this thing going, it looks little garbles. And this is the rear face of the house. And then when you stand in the light portal, you look one way, you look into the contemporary open space, and then if you do a 180-degree turn, you look into the Victorian compartmentalized space. And then when you look up, you look into the light portal that brings light down in a building that has become fairly deep, and that actually becomes fairly dark in the middle. So this is pulling back a little further. So then when you move upstairs, the railings, right, these are kind of the details that we fret over. Details that don't look like details. You know, we fret endlessly over these kinds of moments here to create the absence of detailing, but it takes a long time to make it look absent. So this is basically a single sheet of glass that hangs in the space and that forms the railing. But the way it remains there is that because it slices itself into the white mass, and there's some channeling behind it, of course, that receives it. But we're interested in these moments where glass basically intersects with latex paint, right? Nothing else. So, and here you can see that again. So it's just simply a floating chunk of glass that gets its strength by being grabbed at the corner. And this is upstairs, the same thing occurs. There's a bedroom here, bathroom here, and the third floor. The third floor is the only area where we use the cross bracing in terms of two stainless steel rods that prevent the lateral movement, that creates the lateral stability of the building.
So the next house is the Sky House. So the Sky House is a conceptual house that actually somehow keeps evolving. But the Sky House began with this collage, and then we attempted to figure out how to recreate or how to reverse engineer this collage into an architecture that actually was the setup for this effect.
The thing is that what we try to do with the Sky House is sort of make the oldest, most prevalent tradition in the architecture desire is to make the body float in space. So the first collage became basically kind of a sheet of paper that resembled the sky, and we sort of collaged in this guy. So that was the ambition, and from there on we had to, everything was in service of that effect, let's say. So we knew it had to be round because we had to kind of create, the building itself had to create its own horizon line. And there was a condition where the swimming pool was completely ingested by the building itself. And then there is the hot tub, and there's the opening with the staircase that brings you upstairs. Then the swimming pool is filled, what kind of overflows into the roof deck itself. So the roof deck is not made out of wood, but it's simply made out of 3/4 inches of water, and it reflects the sky. So the entire pool is painted black in order to increase the reflective nature of the water surface.
This would offer cooling, let's say, around the perimeter because of the climate. There's an array of these misting and atomizing systems that were just a series of them across the edges.
Yeah, so along these edges are the atomizers. I mean, the building is in an arid climate. The pool functions as a kind of heat exchange device for the building, but we'll get to that later. So these atomizers are often used to sort of keep one cool, but in our case we use it on the perimeter of the building to eliminate any potential view of land from the deck, from the upstairs deck. And then this is ultimately the effect. This is what the building looks like. This is when you're on the roof, standing on the roof. There's a person swimming here because she's swimming in the deep end of the pool. And these two guys, which is obviously collaged out of the Rieneke Dijkstra photographs of Beach Boys, which is a spectacular book. But these guys are standing on there. And the atomizers, they sort of eliminate any sort of mountainous or whatever is left from the land mass in there, creating a kind of seamless connection between the clouds in the sky and the reflected clouds in the pool. It's an elevation. Another one. And this is the staircase that leads you up to that deck. And this is the wall of the swimming pool. And as you see, the wall is kind of deeply serrated because these are kind of cooling fins, both cooling and heating fins. Because the pool, basically, its filtration system bypasses a phase change materials chamber that is filled with plastic balls with phase change materials in it. Without explaining exactly what they are, these are materials that change phase around 20 degrees Celsius, the comfort of the body, and they have this incredible capacity to store heat, energy. So during the day, the sun shines on the water gets hot, it drops that heat into these phase change material, a kind of battery for heat, and then it goes back to the pool. And then during the night, the same circulation, when the house cools down, the pool retrieves the heat that it gained during the day and brings it back to the pool. And then that pool water closely followed by the fins, then starts to condition the space of the actual building itself. And then this is the thermographs of the building. The fins, actually, this is the plan, right? These are all the functions of the building take place around here. Then the corridor, the living room, and the kitchen are around here. The fins of the pool are actually the deepest on the short side and the shallowest here. So the heat exchange that starts to occur, the whole living space kind of starts to work like a Stirling engine, continuously pushing air around and exchanging the heat and the cool that is then retrieved from the pool water. And here's the living room. And that is the bottom of the hot tub. This is one of those objects that people, kind of like the designless object, right? There were some people that were putting this hot tub together, and they said like, well, all that stuff needs to be insulated, so let's spray some of that stuff on. Nobody will see it anyway. And then all of a sudden, it's actually a remarkable, beautiful object, and therefore we said, okay, well, let's show that then. Right? And to sort of, that's the last image of the project. You can see that with a combination of Halloween costumes and Victoria's Secret outfits, one can play out any kind of scenario that one pleases, whether it's beautiful or hedonistic or in any other way. Okay, we'll speed up. We have 15 minutes left. Okay, so invisible house. The first image of the invisible house is this. It's always kind of a, this was probably, I felt blessed by, of all the work that I've done to make this drawing in a way, because it didn't require using a pen or a pencil. It was a kind of automatic architecture. But this is an accurate rendering of what the invisible looks like, the house looks like during the day on the inside. And this is what it looks like during the night, only a little bit darker. And then, of course, it gets some windows and a portal into the internet and an opening into the fireplace. And this, again, is our favorite person to use for collages is Helmut Newton. In this case, there's a lady that is putting a pillow over this gentleman's head. Why, we don't know, but in the end, the man is deprived of all its senses. So it was kind of a useful image to collage in the invisible house in a way. So this is it during the day. Then the question became, what is it going to look like on the outside? And then we found this image and we said, like, well, this is perfect, because maybe through a type of suburban camouflage, this could be the invisible house, right? Because in this field of sameness, it simply becomes invisible. And it's for the first time in our career that we're actually managed to design a house that 99.9% of the people actually want to have. So this is then the interior. The corners of where the ceiling and the wall come together is rounded, and then the windows have a particular detail. And this detail is this. So here's the outside, here's the inside. It's a kind of detail borrowed from James Turrell. Right? So when you're on the inside, you basically see the wall surface and then a kind of hairline, and then whatever imagery you see on the exterior. So everything that you see on the exterior basically collapses into this plane as a kind of painting in a way. And also all your stuff that is not permanent in this house is the only stuff that shows up. So the architecture of your house has disappeared. Only the objects that fulfill a function of not being permanent shows up. So we don't want to make these sort of precise renderings that our fellow architects make. We're kind of rough in a way, but make no mistake, this is a very accurate representation of what the interior of the invisible house looks like. First of all, here's the Turrellian, for lack of a better word, corner. We don't see the frame of the windows. We don't see where the wall comes to the ceiling because the corners are rounded. During the night when you walk in the hallway, in order to not bump into the room, they are demarcated by those lights that you find in movie corridors. However, when you walk around here, you might bump into other people. So we had another issue to solve, and that is this, that actually the floor and the ceiling, every square foot in the ceiling has actually 16 exact light beams in it, and every light beam is associated with a very narrow focused infrared beam, and every time you interrupt that beam, the light gets triggered and the person gets illuminated. And this is unusual looking. The drawing's kind of inverted. They're supposed to look like this. So this is the circuit. It's a very simple circuit. It does, however, require some snazzy communication devices up here, but we won't get into that. This is basically the floor tile. It has infrared beams, 16 of them in the floor tile, and then 16 infrared receivers in the top tile, included with 16 lenses and 16 high-powered LEDs that create narrow focused beams. This is our first prototype made out of styrofoam. These are the light beams that are being penetrated at 4 feet. The first prototype only worked at 4 feet distance, then the beams started to overlap one another. And this was our second prototype that worked at 8 feet distance. And then this is ultimately the result. Every object that is impermanent in this space gets detected by the infrared beams and subsequently are illuminated.
Okay, this is the last project we're showing, and this project is done in collaboration with Rodolfo Khoury, who's the co-director of the lab we initiated. So I Am Blanky was a response to an invited exhibition that asked us to look into contemporary modes of embroidery. So they were looking at Sushao embroidery, an ancient Chinese form of embroidery, which usually depicts animal scenes or natural scenes. They want us to rethink what it meant to actually deal with that craft with current digital technologies. So our initial impulse was to actually think about textiles, soft materials, hence the blanket, and then we came up with this idea of the blankie, where the comfort of the blankie, the things that a blankie could offer you, let's say, could become possible given an enhanced, let's say, layering of functionality. So along with this idea of the Internet of Things that we were dealing with.
Yeah, so this is where I have to now get my notes out. So I think there's a central question that we deal with in the lab, and that is, what if every object in our surrounding gets an IP address? And this is not something that we sort of came up. We think it's a kind of a natural evolution out of how we're going to move forward with our culture. So it's a recently kind of monumental shift happened in an IP address system. We shifted from an IPv4 system to an IPv6 system because we ran out of, or there's a danger of running out of internet address systems. So the IPv6 system is basically a system that anticipates the notion of the Internet of Things. So IPv6 has 2 to the power of 128 internet addresses. Okay? So that is basically the equivalent of 340 undecillion internet addresses. Like, I've never heard of the word undecillion, but it's a lot, right? So I'll give you some numbers that maybe make more sense. It's 4.8 times 10 to the 28 addresses for the 7 billion people alive in 2011. Or the one that means the most to me, because I'm kind of a metric person, it's 67 billion addresses per square centimeter of the Earth's surface. Right? So that's a lot of internet addresses, and we believe that it's in anticipation that literally every object in the future is going to be connected to the net, and we can query every object, and this object can give us information. So the simple question became for us: what if this blanket gets an IP address? What is it going to communicate? And we started out very ambitious, and we are going to revisit this ambition again. But this is a condition where the blanket that covers the person has now the ability to start to stream information about this person. So in the healthcare environment, this could be streaming information about the state of the body underneath it, body temperature, movement, heart rate, etc., etc. But we had to begin somewhere, so we simply said, what's the first thing this blanket is going to communicate? And this first thing was going to be the shape that the blanket is in. So you drape this blanket over an object, the blanket is now going to communicate, this is the shape that I'm in virtually, in a virtual environment.
Well, because it was the most primitive form of cognition, knowing one's, let's say, the extent of one's body.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing we started to draft up was the circuit. How are we going to do that? Well, we need a lot of sensors. We need a lot of tilt sensors, the ones that you find in iPhones. And we need to query those tilt sensors. So the blanket ultimately became a blanket with 104 tilt sensors in it. And we had to find a mechanism to retrieve the orientation of those tilt sensors in some way. So we started to look at monitors, because monitors do the other way. They basically, monitors, you have, when you look into your cable that goes to your monitor, you see like 20 cables, and somehow through these 20 cables, signals go that show millions of different pixels on your screen, different colors, right? So what the blanket is doing the opposite. And the way that is done in monitors is through multiplexing chips. So we use multiplexing chips. First of all, this is a little microcontroller that you can buy off the internet for $45. It's designed to be sewn into a fabric. This microcontroller gets its information from 2 multiplexers. These multiplexers query a whole series of other multiplexers. They ask, like, what orientation are you reading? And these multiplexers are all connected to these little circles, which are the tilt sensors. So next phase was like, okay, there are 4 minutes left. Next was like, okay, we need to make it on a soft blanket, and that's going to be difficult, so let's make the hardware version first. And there it is. Here are the 2 multiplexers. They query what all these multiplexers are doing here, and these multiplexers are figuring out what all these tilt sensors are doing here, and everything then goes to the little microcontroller. Then we said,
We went through a series of tilt sensors because this blanket had to be soft. So we began to experiment with what it means to have a soft tilt sensor. So essentially, it's a petal formation. It's a flower with that bead, that conductive bead in the middle. Wherever the bead lands on whichever petal is the registration of a certain orientation that it reads.
so this is all goes on one charge, right? You put your plus charge on this. This is all conductive. This is conductive fabric. So you put a charge on this, and all of a sudden this charge goes through this petal down here. So when you have all of a sudden a charge on both sides, you know where that little thingy is laid. So we did a lot of different versions because most of them didn't work. These became too small. They started to like short circuit with one another, and we finally came to one that at least worked, which was a kind of big achievement.
So we have to calibrate the petals and the distances between the petals so that when the bead lands, it actually registers either on one petal or on the other. So everything really had to be calibrated. The size of the bead, the size of the, where the glass bead should go in order not to create short circuiting. So in fact, what looks really decorative was actually a selection of performance criteria that were impacting on the design. And this is pretty close to what we finally ended up with, but not quite. So we went through a series of testing different conductive fabrics. So you see like the second from the top is actually hardwire, but they're all different kinds of ways to conduct electricity. So there's a copper tape, there's silver fabric, and then there's, of course, just threads. They're a lot less reliable, let's say, than the hardwire itself. So we spent a long time fiddling and testing different ways of bridging, stitching, or soft to certain hard components that we knew we must have. So here are the hard components, the multiplex.
Yeah, the multiplexers, they need a breakout board. And it's like, how do you create a rigid chip on a flexible environment, and how do you transform the moment of flexibility to the moment of rigidity? So we tried a lot of different things, is it solid, is it rubberized, is it strong, is it on a flexible disc? This one became sort of very beautiful, and said, okay, maybe this works, a kind of a medium in which flexibility turns into rigidity. Some of them were weird looking, and some of them worked really well, but then were quite ugly. So this was then the first prototype of one multiplexing field. So here's the multiplexer. These are the tilt sensors. We ran experiments on this thing, as you can see over here. It was fairly unreliable. The distances of these lines, because every time you have a conductive piece of fabric and you make it longer and longer, it gets more resistance in it. So there were so many different lengths, it was very confusing to program. Then we went to a shape that became clearer and had more efficiency and basically reduced the length of all these wires to the minimum. And as we were reducing this length, it became more and more like a natural formation idea of the flower. And then my sister came by, and she's a successful fashion designer in Europe. And we said, like, this thing needs to look beautiful, so help us pick some fabric and what goes well with copper fabric. Right? So we used this beautiful taffeta. So we tested it, and then the moment it started to work, it became, again, a sort of bundled mess of wires. So then we said, like, okay, well, we know we can get one thing working. Let's just, either go for broke or we get lucky. Let's count on luck. So we didn't use a grid, we used an hexagonal grid in order to densify and to keep all the lines as short as possible. And then this became the overall blanket in its full size. So here are two multiplexers here and here with the computational little computer on the chip on the back. That is the kind of master controller. And then these chips went to every flower cluster with their multiplexers, and then the tilt sensors then got arranged around these multiplexing things. That whole thing went through the laser cutter. The whole thing, we modified glue guns into heat compressors, maybe, where we started to glue the nickelized aluminum on the fabric with heat. This is Yiping C. He was good with his hands, so he was like, putting all the intricate multiplexing together on beautiful little discs of orange leather. And then here's the final product. And here is the testing of the blanket. That they're like behind the black surfaces. Here is a kind of army of people that were running around, troubleshooting all the connections. And then when they were, when we said, okay, it works, okay, run away. And then Carol would come in and lift up the slide blanket, and then on the monitor, the blanket finally had the virtual version of the blanket was born. And here are some details. Here's the multiplexer. Here are the tilt sensors. We always try to avoid resistors by zigzagging stuff and creating long conductive thread, but it was all too reliable. So resistors was kind of compromised, but it kind of still looked pretty. And these are conditions here, and this is the sort of zoom in on the petal. There's a conductive thread in the middle, and then non-conductive areas here, and then a kind of silver conductive head. And these are the many, many people that made it all happen. Thank you.